sun never goes down and time has slowed down. Would it be too crazy if we decided to stay forever? Decided to stay forever, forever.
When the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on them.
Well, that's not what I was told.
And maybe you need a new lesson. Repeat after me. Hakuna Matata.
What?
Hakuna Matata. It means no worries.
Repeat after me. Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. It means no worries.
Test one, two. Test one, two. Test one, two. One. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test. Sounds better. Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Test.
That feels good! Baby!
Test 1, 2, 3. All right, we're good.
Okay. Are things working now? Can you hear me? Hey, troops,
Is this one?
can you hear me?
Can hear you.
All right. Good. Okay.
Welcome, everybody, to our first session of the Communication, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion workshops. Today, we make a beginning. And this beginning will conclude in May with some of you moving on, attending other workshops, and receiving a certificate in facilitation for diversity, equity, and inclusion. The work sites today have given prominence to this topic. Awareness of diversity, equity, and inclusion is what citizenship is about in our world today. So today we start. We start by reaching out. And what I would ask each of you to do for a minute is to stand up. And I want you to reach out to a stranger who you don't know and give that person a fist bump, an elbow bump, a compliment, or get to know that person's name. For those of you who are live streaming this, give yourself a cheer. We start by reaching out, the first step of dialogue. And today's dialogue, I want to thank the School of Communication, Media, and Journalism. I want to thank our sponsors, the College of Liberal Arts, the Campus Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Holocaust Resource Center, and the School of Global Studies. Today we begin a series of speakers talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and dialogue is an ongoing process. It begins with giving each other space to make mistakes. And just in the planning of this program, I did a blooper. I sent a memo out across campus, and in it I talked about diversity as gender, generations, race, different ethnicities, and I used the word sexual preferences. Someone pointed out to me, sexual preference implies that you have a choice in your sexuality. The word I should have used according to most medical and psychological experts, is sexual orientation. Dialogue begins with giving each other space to make mistakes as we learn together. And today, because of my mistake, I've learned something. And hopefully you have too. And hopefully you will continue with this program as we move to our next speaker in January. But to introduce our program today, I would like to invite Will Horner, a graduating senior in 22, and Nadia Gonzalez, who graduated in May 21, to introduce our speaker.
Hello there, Dr. Baker. Greetings, greetings. Hello there, Nadia.
Hey there, Will.
So, I'd also like to say hello to all the other students and faculty that are attending the event today with Dr. Baker regarding the very first Kane University program on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And our first distinguished guest will be Dr. Bailey Baker.
So, Nadia, how would you describe Dr. Baker?
Is it possible to describe a man like him? Amazing, interesting, answers questions with a question, really gets you thinking.
That's for sure. And it really is hard to introduce a man who really doesn't need any kind of introduction. And he has done so many things over the course of his career and taught in such a way that really makes students think. And hopefully, that's what you're all here for today.
So let's talk for a second about Dr. Baker's life. He was born and raised for several years in New Orleans, Louisiana. At age 12, he had his family move to Berkeley, California, where he started his new life.
As he puts it, kids are moochers. So he had to follow the family because that's where dinner was. From there, he attended California State Long Beach for his undergrad and then went on to pursue his PhD at Purdue University.
At Purdue, he was the only black student to attend the university back in 1974, nearly 50 years ago. This, rather than hamper his willingness to achieve and his ability to learn, gave him even more ideas on how to unlock the inner workings of race and what diversity and inclusion really means.
He wanted to learn. So, being the only person of color did not bother him, but rather made him more questioning of the world around him and how you create change.
His career at Kane spanned nearly 35 years, landing his first teaching job here back in 1986. In spring of 2020, he retired after many years of giving important lessons to the students of Keene University.
And the lessons learned in his classrooms are one that were not forgotten, inspiring droves of students to pursue their education further and question the world around them.
As a recent graduate myself, I'm so glad I had the pleasure of taking one of Dr. Baker's courses. On the first day of class, he made it clear that we would be thinking outside of the box, fighting our own perspectives and our assumptions. That knowledge is gained through being skeptical and thinking critically. Dr. Baker walked into class once with mixed socks and asked us if it mattered. Just as we questioned the simplicity of how to wear socks, we were meant to question everything.
So, question everything we did. His many stories and experience captivate those willing to listen and offer sound philosophy into the inner workings of communication and how to really think.
Because of these conversations with Dr. Baker, we really did get us thinking. For example, he brought up the differences between teachers, and students. What did he say about that, Will?
That back in the days of the chalkboard, the difference between a student and a teacher was he got the chalk.
And so he would give each student in his classroom a piece of chalk. And whenever during the discussions, the student felt like he needed to write or have a comment on the discussion, they would raise their hand and go to the board, and there Dr. Baker would sit and listen.
This exchange was monumental in Dr. Baker's teaching philosophy because rather than being a lecturer who holds the power of the chalk, He turned it into a discussion where everybody had a voice.
And this is the key to how Dr. Baker teaches. Student engagement at any time during this presentation, you feel like you have a comment, don't be shy, and be a part of the conversation. As he puts it, student engagement is key.
And now, to introduce a man who needs no introductions in the words that he wanted, here's Dr. Baker.
Wow, and thank you. Now, Dr. Lynch introduced me to this program by talking about giving a capstone lecture. I thought about that, and we talked, and I thought I would turn this into a kind of classroom. So I will come to you today with talking points, with stories, with questions. And I want you to respond, ask questions. What we'll be talking about today are difficult questions. Now, some of you will be taking the other workshops. Now, and you will, I'm understanding, want to be trainers and facilitators. So my task today is to heighten your ability to engage difficult conversations. Now, the topic of I think the whole program centers around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, that's an interesting trifecta for me, as you'll see as we go through this. Now, Dr. Lynch has always also suggested that we'll do this by looking at the nature of communication and diversity and the role that communication and diversity have in our lives. Dr. Lynch has already suggested that there is a range of diversities. Everything is different under the sun. But we're going to focus on diversity as it applies to race and culture, all right? That's our focal point. And remember, we want to heighten our ability to engage difficult conversations. What I will do for you today is to suggest some difficult conversations I've been a part of. Now, when I think about difficult conversations, that's not a negative. Some ho-hum conversations should be made difficult because after that interaction and the thinking that goes into it, there may be a positive outcome. So don't look at difficult conversations as a negative. I look at them sometimes as an opportunity to explore ideas. All right, you with me with that? Make a noise. Oh, yeah. Now, some of you I know attend Baptist churches, right? Who in here attends a Baptist church? Anybody? All right, you know the rules in a Baptist church. All right, now, let's think about this for a minute. Difficult conversations involving race and culture. All right. Let me share some stories with you. The first story, I have to hearken back to when I was a junior in high school. I worked as a locker room attendant for swimming classes. And here's how it operated quickly. The kids, 4, 5, 6 years old, would come in, put their clothes in their locker, shower, and go out to the pool. It was my responsibility to facilitate that. Make sure they put their things in the closet and got them out to the pool. So one day, I went through this process. Now I'm about 16, 17 years old. Then I went back to my desk and I was always reading. And curiously enough, I remember the book I was reading at that time. Way back then, it was Thomas A. Bailey's Diplomatic History of the United States. So I sat there and I was reading, and I felt this presence in front of me. And I looked up, and there was the cutest little white kid there who was supposed to be in the pool. And he was standing there staring at me. So I looked up and I said to him, "Hi." And he looked at me and he said, and I remember this is way back when, he said, "You're a Negro, huh?" I said, "Yes." "How do you know?" And he said, "Because you're brown." I said, "Okay." To myself, let's talk about this. How would you like to be a Negro? And he said, I said, "You know, it's fun to be a Negro." I said, "Well, why wouldn't you want to be a Negro?" He said, "Because my parents said," now right there, in later life, this kid may have trouble talking about race and culture. But he was so innocent at that moment. And I had a little thing to say to him, but we need not talk about that right now. Let me note a couple other things. I hope you don't mind my stories, because hopefully they're setting things up for us. I guess this was legal years ago. I went for a job interview after finishing my graduate work. And there were about 6 potential colleagues, future colleagues, interviewing me. And one of the questions they asked me, and I want you to think about this, how you would respond, or how would you recommend that someone respond. Remember, you're looking for a job in a relatively tight job market. And one of them asked me the question, "Would you want to be hired here because you're black?" Now, how do you respond to that? Somebody yell something out. How would you respond to that? It depends on the circumstances. Okay. Well, who knows? You'd quit. You wouldn't go there. All right. Here's my run on it, and I like your runs too. Say that again? Okay, and they said that to you. You're hired because you're black. Okay, wow. All right, well, here is my response. Because I like to create difficult conversations sometimes. So the expectation, I believed, was that I was to say, "No, I want to be hired because of my qualifications." All right, now, I knew I was qualified for the job. I didn't know whether I was the best candidate or not because I didn't know the other candidates. And I'm a communication guy, and they should have known better. So when they said that to me, would I want to be hired because I'm black, I said with all of the enthusiasm I could muster, "Yes, yes." And then I just looked, because I believed that they were not prepared to follow up with that. I thought that they expected the qualifications argument, but that's a game I wouldn't play. So it was interesting because once I said yes with all of that enthusiasm, we sat and looked at each other for 4 or 5 seconds, which felt like 2 years, because no one had anything to say after that. So then I said something, and it created an opportunity for a difficult conversation. You follow me okay with that? All right, so creating, as Dr. Lynch says, the space for a difficult conversation. All right, and I think they wanted to hire me because of that difficult conversation that they experienced. Now, I want to take a little time with this, and I'm trying to watch the clock as well. I once taught a class at another university in what was called interracial communication. And it was an interesting class. And I had some real characters in the class. So I decided to do what's called a sociodrama. Are any of you familiar with sociodramas? Here's how it worked. I had a doll, a black ventriloquist doll, that I kept in my office. I brought that to class, and I propped it up in front of the class. Then I got two white students, to represent a family that wanted to adopt, and they wanted to adopt a black kid. Then I had two administrators, two black students in the role of administrators, who were told that they were not to let this white couple adopt this black kid, but they couldn't use race as a reason. Now, the way it works, the physicality of it, is you have two students up, one in one chair, one in the other, representing the white couple. Then, in front of them, two chairs with the two administrators. Are you following me okay? All right. And they were to talk to each other. Now, the rest of the class could participate by coming up, standing behind the couple that they wanted to speak for. So if you had something to say that would lend to the argument of not letting them get the black kid, you would simply stand behind the administrators and wait for a moment and then say what you have to say. Or if you wanted to say something representing the other side, the white couple, you stand behind them and say what you have to say. And it got so involved at one point that I remember one student would stand behind one side and then go over and stand behind the other side. So it was very interesting as the dialogue continued. Oh, I made this white couple an impeccable couple. You could find no fault with them, pretty much. I had a student in the class who was older than the rest, who was intimidating, and he participated, and here's how it happened. As we went through this for about 5 or 6 minutes, some of the black students in the class yelled out, "Don't let them have the baby. Don't let them have the baby." So the pressure was on. So students were lined up to say what they had to say on one side or the other. Then as this particular student, this intimidating student, stood behind the administrators, it got difficult for other people to come up and speak because they were a little bit, again, afraid of this guy. So I decided to go up and stand behind the white couple and make arguments to him. And I would like to say, as expected, I out-argued him to the point where he got frustrated. He pushed the chairs apart from the administrators and dived across the others and hit me and knocked me back and was on top of me about to whack me when he came to his senses. And again, difficult conversations. And this person I'm described as intimidating was really worked up with that topic. And he actually, as we talked, began to weep because he was so involved with that little exercise. It was a difficult conversation. And I thought, the first thing I learned from that is I'll never do that again. But after that, we had real good, as Dr. Lynch likes to say, dialogue about issues of race and culture. So that was one of those, again, difficult situations. And just finally with the story stuff, I'll come close to home. Here at Kane, it was the year of the O.J. Simpson trial. I guess when I think about it, many of you were not on the planet then, is that right? But you know of the trial, the OJ trial. The juice is loose, okay. We were in a persuasion class on the 3rd floor of Von Ames. It seems like all of our classes were there. And the verdict was imminent. So one of the students gave me his beeper. So when the verdict came, we would know. Now about half the class was white, about half the class was black. All right, so we're talking persuasion when word came in. So I looked down and I read the verdict to them. Now, the black students were jubilant. Yes, 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 yes. The white students were dismayed. What? What's going on here? Why did that happen? All right, now, we had the opportunity for a discussion. Again, a difficult situation as an opportunity to talk. We didn't solve any problems then, but we started to talk about that particular issue. Now, what was perplexing to me is, I believe that these students, white or black, didn't care about OJ at all. But there seemed to be some kind of racial or culture allegiance going on here with the OJ situation. So you can see difficult situations can produce good learning. So don't avoid difficult situations. Again, sometimes you want to create them. For example, again, hearkening back to that interview I had I said something like, no, I want to be hired because of my qualifications, that would have dismissed an opportunity for a difficult situation. So that after talking with them, maybe that would inform my decision as to whether I would want to be on that faculty or not. You follow me okay? All right, so difficult situations are not necessarily bad. Now, shift just a little bit. Is it fair to call our society a multiracial, multicultural society? Is that a fair overall description of our society? Make a noise. Yes, okay. Now, are the cultural and racial groups in the society more or less kind of equal in social power? No. All right. Some groups have more power than others. Now, and I don't think it's a stretch if I say, generally, white folks have more power than the rest of the folk. Is that fair enough? All right. Now the question is, how come? Now some want to say it's because of policies that have stacked the deck in favor of whites. And they have labeled this racist, pretty much. So you hear the argument of a racist society. Fair enough? Come on, we're getting difficult. We're going to work into difficulty. I want you to be ready for that. So that's one of the things, and the buzzword that's going out now that we knew 40 years ago was the idea of systematic racism. So that's the buzz across the world now. Now, and one of the ways of going about trying to mitigate or kind of solve this imbalance among groups is the notion of diversity, at least from my understanding of diversity. It tends to want to be a solution by giving other people a chance at equity and inclusion. All right, now, let me make this kind of statement right off the bat. I don't basically buy into the diversity idea. It sort of reminds me of the integration argument of years ago. So I have some hesitation. And I'll make that clear to you in just a bit. Now, I would much rather than talk about equity and diversity and inclusion and talk about cultural criticism, cultural dominance, and hegemony. I think that's a better kind of thing, the way to look at it. But we're going to work with diversity today. Now, again, going back years, and thinking about issues of race and culture in the country, I think there's one underlying question that has to be answered before any of this really resolves the problem of race and culture and power. Here is the question. I call it the perennial question. It simply works this way. What is or should be the place of American black folks in America? Anything you talk about during this series or any difficult conversations that you may have in the future about race and culture in America, I believe that subtending or underlying that discussion, that argument, even diversity and equity and all of that, is this question about what is the place of American black folks in this country? All right, now, an example, and maybe somebody can help me with this. Most of you are American citizens, fair enough? Yeah, most of you are American citizens. And you have the right to vote, is that right? All right, now, it's interesting to me that we have had a Voting Rights Act since 1965. It was gutted in 2013, pretty much. It protected the right to vote for blacks and other minorities, but primarily blacks. Came from the Civil Rights Movement, came a year after the passing of the Civil Rights Bill. But my question is, where are the citizens in here? Most of you are citizens of the United States, and you have the right to vote once again. Now the question is your right to vote, is my right to vote constitutionally based, or is it statutory? Now, are any white folks worried about their right to vote being abridged because the Voting Rights Act was sabotaged, or that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act has not passed? I would think not. But black folks pretty much need the Voting Rights Act passed every 5 years. And as long as that routinely happened, then no questions. But now, we can see what state legislatures are doing to subvert the right to vote, primarily, they say, for people of color. Now, in terms of language, I like to distinguish between colored people and people of color. Colored people are folks like me. People of color are across the color divide. All right, no. So that's the question that kind of haunts me. Why do I need a voting rights bill? The 15th Amendment is not enough. Are you following me okay? Yeah, so why do we need, I'll treat this as a rhetorical question right now, because I want you to bang your head. Remember the perennial question? What is, should be the American black's place in American society? And here, this fundamental right, the right to vote, seems to be different for blacks than for whites, because ours seem to be statutory and others seem to be constitutionally based in spite of the 15th Amendment. So again, the makings for perhaps a difficult conversation. Now, in here has had class with me? Anybody? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, maybe you'll recall this. I've put some things out there so far for you to kind of muse later, talk with your friends, your parents, your enemies. Across this university, as far as I can remember, people have been talking about critical thinking. I would imagine your professors talk about critical thinking. Is that right? Okay, critical thinking, critical thinking, critical thinking. Now, I want to introduce you to a couple of things here. One I call pedagogic values. Now, I'm in here talking, giving my slant on certain kinds of things concerning difficult conversations. And I should also say, everything I'm talking about can be translated into to me. So all of the things I've said so far, to me. All right, I have no truths, capital T, in any of this. It's to me, my point of view. And that could be a changing point of view. I could do this in 2 weeks and you'll get something different if I learn something different. All right, now, here are my 2 pedagogic values. Think about it in terms of what we're doing here today, and also think about it in all of your classes and in life generally. Here they are. As I'm talking to you, the first pedagogic value is the utility value. What is the use of what I'm saying to you? How can you use this stuff? Haven't you gone to class with that attitude? How do I use this? How can I turn a buck with this? What is the pragmatic value of this? So I want you to ask that question of what you hear here today and just make that a part of your repertoire. Sensitivity to that utility value. Now, but there's a caveat. You may not see any particular use for something the moment that you are exposed to it, but you can hang on to it a little bit because down the line, boom, it may happen. It happened to me with the International Phonetic Alphabet. I saw no value of it. Then I wrote my dissertation around that. So that's the caveat, all right? The second pedagogic value I call the heuristic value. And here is the heuristic value and how it works. New insight, that's the magic phrase, is what the person's saying. Is that delivering some intellectual news, some new insight, some different way of looking at something, something that makes you say, I never looked at it this way before. That's curious, that's interesting. That's what I mean by heuristic value. And in any of your lectures and classroom discussions, or even here today, you may have a heuristic moment where you say, never thought about it that way, never looked at it that way. Now, let me issue a caveat with that. Just because it's different and interesting and offers a new insight doesn't mean necessarily that it's better than what you believed previously. All right? It's just a new way of investigating that. So you may discover that, wow, this is something I can use. A new insight, I'm happy for this. Or you may look at it and say, nah, not a big deal. And jettison it. Follow me okay? So it's that utility value and that heuristic value. Now, and with that heuristic value, think about it. Have you had friends that you've known as long as you can remember? And then you see them in a different way. You have a heuristic moment. You say, oh, I didn't know that about you. It's the first time I've looked at you this way. So it's something more or less familiar with. Now, here's the difficult moment too. With critical thinking, difficult conversations. I want to maybe introduce two ideas, one by Jürgen Habermas and the other by Jonathan Haidt. Here are the two. Habermas talks about critical communicative rationality. Critical communicative rationality. And I want to put this at one end of a spectrum. And all that means simply is that you're willing to call into question what you believe, no matter how cherished that belief is, how deeply cultural that belief is. You're willing to call it into question. Now, calling an idea into question does not mean that you are negatively evaluating it. It simply means, oh boy, I just thought of something very curious. I've had a heuristic moment just in talking with you. It simply means that, gee, I'm ready to look at this, to examine it. And you may come up with something different, once again, or you may maintain. But the point is, you're willing to call it into question. If we're not willing to call even deep-seated beliefs into question, then that belief is in charge of us. We're not in charge of the belief. Now, at the other end with Jonathan Haidt, I know you've used this term because it's buzzing out there now. Confirmation bias. Familiar with that? The idea that what? We like to follow those things that support what we believe. Like if you're a liberal, you're not likely to watch Fox News. You tend to want to watch liberal stuff. And that's turned around as well. So, when you find difficult situations, if you're caught into a stance of confirmation bias, you're not going to make much headway with that. But if you look at it from the other point of view, with critical communicative rationality, again, you're open to the new idea. You're not afraid, again, of change. Here's an attitude that I like to believe about myself. I would like to believe that there's nothing I believe today that I'm obliged to believe tomorrow. Now, that doesn't mean I'm wonky with my beliefs. Some say I'm failing with that belief because I'm pretty stubborn. Ask my 9 wives. It's pretty stubborn, and I'm a pretty stubborn guy. But that's perception. But again, I'd like to think that. Do you follow that okay? Nothing I believe today that I'm obliged to believe tomorrow. I'd like to think that I would change my mind about anything. That's in the spirit of a communicative, critical rationality. And again, it doesn't mean that I'm wishy-washy, wonky, or flip-flopper in my beliefs. It simply means that I'm good with it. Another thing, and I'll say this, if I meet someone and I find them interesting and they have a point of view on something different than mine, especially something that I'm ego involved in, sometimes when we meet that kind of situation, we want to challenge their ideas. And I'm not going to knock challenging their ideas. That's okay. But what I like to do sometimes is probe. I ask the question, how can a bright person like you disagree with me? That sounds so arrogant, but that's what I say. How can you disagree with me? And I want to probe, not challenge, probe their minds to see how they got to that belief. that so opposes mine. I don't have to challenge, probe. I may be in a better position to learn something new, to have a heuristic moment. Follow me? Not always. Barbara Tanner talks about our argument culture, that we like to challenge. But we can not challenge all the time. That can be kind of bad with your blood pressure. All right. So, we're thinking about difficult situations that focus on race and culture. Now, we're going to move along a little bit, and now we're beginning to have real fun. I used to hear people say, it's bad to label others. Have you heard that? Don't label others. That's intellectual nonsense. How can you not have a label to go with the category in which you put a person in? I don't get it. I'm looking at you, for example, as students mostly. I'm labeling you as students. I'm categorizing you as students. And I'm talking to you on the basis of this image I have of students. I'm talking to the image. This is a very impersonal communication situation because I don't know any of you personally, so I can't adapt to anything personal about you, so I have to keep it at the level of students, and that's what I work with. But I'm open to see, as we will see, differences among students. And then I can get some different kind of data and have an interpersonal conversation with some of you. All right, and you see me as a former, handsome, retired professor, and that's okay. And we can have some interesting things that come from that in the area of race and culture. You don't mind these Baker stories, do you? Please say no. All right, say you enjoy them. And we're going to get some, okay, good, thank you. Now, tell you about my maternal grandmother. She worked as a domestic in New Orleans many years ago. One day she went to, now we're talking about a little bit about categorizing people. And sometimes we break out of the category, but you have to begin with categories, I believe. So my maternal grandmother got a job interview as a domestic in New Orleans, and she went to this interview. And it was a white lady who was going to interview her for the job. That was the owner of the home. And when my grandmother got to the door, and the lady opened the door and looked at my grandmother, she said, "Leona, I didn't know Negroes had blue eyes." And my grandmother said, "Child, what's today?" And the lady said, "Well, it's Tuesday." And my grandmother said, "Oh, I'm not a Negro on Tuesdays." Boy, I had some curious people in my background. All right. So you can see how you're working that category and something outside that category. And my grandmother's example, I think, works well there. You know, yeah, I've got a little, we're done in here in, oh gee, 15 minutes. I'm ready for 2 days. All right, jump. Well, I won't do that. All right, I need to say something about, well, just one other quick factor, then I want to say something about communication, and so I'll try to work it that way. Thinking about categories. Now, if you think about how you categorize yourself, You have many ways that you categorize yourself. I have many ways that I characterize myself. Now, categorize myself. Now, listen carefully. Is there one category that we all fit in? And what is that? You are a human being. Is that right? Now, I have to do this quickly, but who is calling him or herself a human being? Where are you? Raise your hand, human beings. Wow, I don't see any hands going up. Do you think this is a tricky question? Oh, it is. I'm laying a trap for you. That's why some of your crap detectors kicked in and you say, I'm not raising my hand. All right. Now, who calls him or herself a human being? Where are you? Come on. If you call yourself a human being, raise your hand. Now, some of you are not raising your hand. How come? What is it? What is it? It's not a family identity? Oh, not a salient identity. All right. Because I sort of like that. Because what it says to me is that when you label yourself a human being, you're not quite sure what you're calling yourself. So when you say it's not salient, that's important. But again, you need to make it salient. Because as we talk about, and we're not going to do that today, ethics in communication, and when we think about living in a global village, then we must talk about this thing that unites all of us and make it salient, that notion of being a human being. So I'll say quickly that, and I have to say it quickly, I can't develop it, but this idea of a human being, what makes us different than any other species that ever lived, is that we do what? If I asked you to do a human thing, what would you do? Think. What is it? Think. Who said think? Think. Wash your mouth out. Wash your mouth out. I used to ask a question in class, 3 behaviors: doing, thinking, and talking. List those in most important from 1 to 3. This is in a communication theory class. And most students would say, when they rank them, would be thinking, doing, and talking. And I would say, how dare you come to a communication class and not rank talking primary. Now, human beings, I wish we could really have this conversation as Homo sapiens. I like to relabel us as Homo symbolicus, because we are the symbol-using form of life, and that makes our lives as human beings possible. So we have to make that salient. Oh, I like that. It's good to ask questions, because you never know what will come out of it. Now, shifting that to, and I defined ourselves pretty much as talking pieces of meat. I don't want to use the label animal. I am not an animal, but I don't know what to call myself exactly, so I just say, after Frank Dance, a talking piece of meat. And that works for me right now. All right, now, let's look at communication ideas that you could develop, think about. Where are the communication majors? All right, I used to have something I called the wonderful question. Let's say you go to a cocktail party with other students across the campus, and you're there talking in groups of 3 or 4 or 5. You know how these cocktail parties work. And they're talking about their major, and there's a history major in your group, and that history major holds the floor for 1.5 minutes to 2, talking about the Ming Dynasty or something else. And you find that so interesting, and others find that so interesting. Now, you're a communication major. What are you going to talk about to hold that group for a minute and a half or two, because everybody communicates. Everybody doesn't have an opinion of the Ming Dynasty, but everybody communicates. What is it that you know about communication that an otherwise intelligent student who communicates more or less well doesn't know? That's of significant value. That's a question you should explore. What is it I know and can do with? Remember the utility value. All right, so you tie it together there. That would be a wonderful conversation. And again, that gets us and will help us with this idea of difficult conversations. So let me give you just some kind of principles, more or less, that I find useful in working the communication business. One, have any of you heard the question, what are the two facts of life? You ever heard that question? Make a noise. And what are the two facts of life? Yeah, death and taxes. Now that's cute. I don't think it's practical. The two facts of life are you will communicate, you can't get around it, and you will have relationships. Can't get around those two facts of life. And I'll also say, as a kind of normative term, is that the quality of the communication is important to the quality of the relationship. And that's fair enough. You get that. All right, working idea. Work that into your repertoire, that idea. Also, get a little technical just now, message one, or message sent, is not message received. I take that as foundational. I'm sending a message to you. You're going to do something with that message, and we're going to say something more specific in just a second. That's not quite what I sent, but sometimes good enough for understanding. But I take that as a general principle. Message sent is not message received. There's a difference. Sometimes it may not make a significant difference, but there's a difference. I like to keep that in mind. Now, oh boy. Boy, that is some interesting stuff there. Let me see if I can do it. Okay, I can't do it. Let me do this. When we think about communication, we think about messaging. Is that fair enough? Message, message, message. And then if someone asks you, and remember you're at that cocktail party, what's a message? How would you approach answering that question? When I used to raise that question, I would say, you can't use the word information. How would you answer that question as a communication major? Here's the way I would approach it, and we can work it into our idea of difficult conversations. I would look at a message as a symbol or a system of symbols, a language, if you will, with anticipated meaning potential. And this is the way I'm going to flex that right now. Again, when I come in to speak to you today, I anticipate how you're going to respond to what I say. But I can't know, once again, remember that foundational term, because I cannot transfer meaning to you. Right? You have to do that. You have the potential, and you have the power of translation. So hopefully what I anticipate is what you give to the message. And we can work that so well. All right, but I'm kind of pushing it through quickly now. Also, when we think about communication, the meaning of the message is always, I like to argue, determined by the listener. The message means what the listener says it means. Does that make sense to you? without. The message means what the listener says it means. That can be frustrating sometimes. Any of you ever get in an argument with someone and they say, well, this is what you said and that's what it meant. And you said, no, but they said yes. And trust me, that's what it means. All right, so you get into these difficult conversations, you will run into that. How do you resolve that? Dude, gee, Chris, 5 more seconds. Oh, man. Turn the clock back, would you? Just turn the clock back. It's not really 20 minutes to 2, it's 1:15. Let's just turn the clock back. Who's in charge anyway, us or the clock? Us. So turn the clock back. All right. Gee, this is not going to work. Let me do one of the things with communication, and then we'll just have to do something there. Maybe I didn't use my time as appropriate as I could have. But ask this question of you. Words are part of communication. Certainly we know that. Can words hurt? Can words make you feel good? Think about that. This is a trick question for sure. Can words hurt? I've heard of verbal abuse and the idea that words can hurt. I don't know how that works, how words hurt, or how words make you feel good. So let's just say that I'm ignorant of that right now. If someone called you a name, a racial slur of some kind, can that hurt? How can it hurt? If I say to you, for example, something easy, I'm looking at you, I don't know you, and I look at that, I say, man, I like that shirt. That's okay. But what if I said, gee, that shirt sucks. You should not come to a public place looking like that. Is that a situation of words hurting? It could hurt. I mean, this is a light example because I'm rushing. All right, here's the point I'm getting at. When you listen to certain statements, and I had a tape I wanted to run for you with racial slurs that we could talk about in terms of a difficult conversation. But here's something I'll try to end with, Chris. There are certain statements that we listen to that are what we call in general semantics judgment statements, statements of approval or disapproval. So if someone calls you a racial slur, how would you handle that? You could simply say, because judgment statements of approval or disapproval are autobiographical. You're basically talking about yourself and how you feel about something. So if I talk about it and say his shirt is hideous, I'm talking about my feelings about his shirt. If I use an ethnic slur in any of you, to another person, I'm talking about how I feel about that other person or the group to which that person belongs. So if someone called you a racial slur, it shouldn't hurt because they're talking about how they feel. So if someone calls me that word, I would say simply, I see that you're having trouble with people like me. Let's talk about the trouble you're having. Follow me? That's a tough one. We have to work out some exercises with that. Or they may call me an ethnic slur and I'll whop them. I have a range of behaviors. I can whop, I can feel bad, or I can understand it as that's their point of view. Let's talk about their point of view. And there's a whole lesson there in terms of communication and difficult questions. and difficult conversations. Now, I should be charged with not allocating my time well, but I won't do that to myself. I'll just say they spent too much time introducing me. It's not my fault. Oh boy, all right. I told Mia Amor that Chris gave me a big assignment for an hour. I said it would be much easier to do this in 2 hours than 1 hour. But the hour is up, and I thank you for your attendance. Be good. Oh boy, there's so many things you can do. Just with that, for example, judgment statement from general semantics. There are other things that can go along with that. And the provocative questions that you can answer. For example, just that word, can words hurt? Right there, there's a conversation. There's a conversation. Okay, I know you have to get to class. Oh. And we have the mic here for questions.
Thank you, everybody. There are refreshments out in the hallway, and Dr. Baker will be out there if you have any questions or comments you'd like to make.